This video will get complicated, as the lifestyle and evolution of the honeybee deals with multiple factors. And so, in order to make the concept digestible, this video will be divided into 4 sections, each of which being crucial factors as to the success of honeybees and how they came to be. On screen here will be the 4 factors discussed. Number 1. The Hymenoptera among insects. 1. First, let's start with the place honeybees occupy within the insect kingdom. Honeybees are in the order Hymenoptera, which includes bees, wasps, ants, and sawflies. Sawflies are the oldest in evolutionary history and the most primitive. Wasps come next and are differentiated by their distinct wasp waist. This was a game changer for these insects, as it allowed them to have an articulated precision stinger or ovipositor for laying eggs. This allowed them to become very specific in the tasks they perform, both in offense and reproduction. Wasps were also the first to evolve eusociality. Bees and ants came next at around the same time. Bees are basically vegetarian wasps, and ants are basically terrestrial wasps, although typically their reproductives retain flight, like termites. The 2 key things to remember here are that the Hymenoptera have found their success due to the way their wasp waist allows them to become very task-oriented insects, and that bees within this context are the most vegetarian of the Hymenoptera, save for a few ant species. Point 2. Eusociality. Okay, bear with me because this section gets complicated. So, eusociality. What is it? In simple terms, eusociality is the most complex form of social behavior found in animal life. It's a relatively rare phenomenon, evolving typically only in rare circumstances. There are 2 known groups that exhibit it in mammals, being naked mole rats and humans, and there are about 4 known groups of arthropods that exhibit it, being the Hymenoptera, termites, 1 species of beetle, and a few species of snapping shrimp. Now, some other species exhibit sociality, such as social spiders or parrots or clownfish, or all sorts of other animals. However, to be truly eusocial, the species must satisfy these 3 criteria of complexity. 1. Cooperative brood care. Individuals within the group help care for offspring that are not their own. 2. Overlapping generations. Multiple generations of adults must live together in the same colony. And 3. Reproductive division of labor. There is a distinct separation between reproductive and non-reproductive individuals, with some members specializing in reproduction while others perform tasks like foraging, defense, or brood care. Without these 3 criteria, it can't be said that the animal is more committed to the colony's survival rather than itself. And where this priority lies, being socially inclined rather than individually inclined, is what truly defines eusociality. This is important because no combination of these traits, except for all 3 of them together, satisfy true social commitment over individual interest. In the shortest amount of words, eusociality is when the individuals of a species are more dedicated to each other than themselves. Charles Darwin struggled more with the concept of eusociality than with religion when formulating his theory of evolution. This is because evolution allows a perspective that explains the timeline of how animal and plant life came to be. However, its key statement that animals and plants survive and are constantly in competition and constantly refining begs the question of how such an inherent instinctual idea such as protect your own individual interests, protect your own DNA, could be overridden to then say protect the DNA of others, protect the well-being of others. Indeed, eusocial animals are coded to look out for each other more than themselves, Some examples include how termites will commit suicide by exploding a sticky substance to subdue threats to their colony. Or honeybees will lose their stinger and half of their organs when they sting large mammals, thus becoming suicide bombers, just so that the pain they inflict will be remembered longer by the attacker. So, how did Charles Darwin reconcile this? Well, he decided that natural selection could work at the family level, and by family I mean the literal family, not taxonomic family. This is true and is what we call kin selection today. However, bizarrely, Hymenopteran kin selection is different than that of most eusocial animals. Allow me to explain first with termites, whose eusociality is more typical and appears to have evolved in a way that's more easily explained. Termites are actually cockroaches that evolved to be eusocial. There are 3 key factors that likely went into this. And by the way, this only happened once, as every single individual termite is eusocial and evolved from a single common ancestor. The first thing is that cockroaches were already semi-social, meaning that they work somewhat cooperatively to those they are closely related to. Depending on the species, cockroaches will share food, exhibit parental behavior, leave scent trails for other roaches to follow, like ants do, and even form territory-based social hierarchies. These insects already cooperate to make the most out of food sources, and having any amount of social behavior is a key prerequisite to one day evolving eusociality. The second point is that cockroaches share not just food, but key gut microbes to their friends and young. This is important, as without these, many would die, as they would be unable to break down food resources required to survive. The stage, therefore, would be set for these insects to become obligate to one another in some capacity, which is a key prerequisite for eusociality. The third and final key factor was likely their microhabitat and food source. A big question with regards to eusociality is, why bother? What is an animal getting out of the deal? Well, there's usually a prerequisite here as well. There's a habitat or food source that is better exploited by a colony rather than an individual, either because there's a copious amount of it or it requires a strong defense to protect and maintain. This is why ants, bees and wasps, beetles, and even shrimp form and often defend nests. With termites, they combine the gut symbiont earlier along with already existing structure of rotting logs and wood. Or they build their own nests like ants and consume wood and other plant material, usually setting up their base to match whatever their diet is. In conclusion, termites were likely able to evolve from cockroaches because A, they already exhibited social and parental behavior, 2, their gut microbes made them obligate towards it, and 3, there was a resource worth sacrificing individual liberties to protect and capitalize on. These prerequisites match the 3 criteria for eusociality quite well. Part 3. Haplodiploidy. Now, you might assume that the Hymenoptera exhibits similar prerequisites to termites, beetles, naked mole rats, and shrimp. And you'd be right, but even more right than you realize, because they've had a secret X factor long before they ever evolved eusociality. This prerequisite is haplodiploidy. Now, explaining this will be the most complicated part of the video, so bear with me. Here we go. Unlike most vertebrates, or even insects, honeybees and most of the Hymenoptera have a haplodiploid sex determination system. Let's go piece by piece and see what exactly that is. A honeybee queen or workers are diploid with 32 chromosomes,
that is, 16 homologous pairs. A male or drone has half that amount, with 16 unpaired chromosomes. During her mating flight, which only the queen goes on, she will mate with multiple males, often 20 to 30 even. She stores all their sperm inside a specialized organ called a spermatheca, which keeps the sperm alive for years. The queen can control sperm release and decide whether each egg is fertilized or left unfertilized, which changes how the chromosomes behave. If an egg is unfertilized, it develops into a haploid male. The queen produces the male using meiotic recombination. That is, her 32 chromosomes are reshuffled and reduced down to 16. This means drones are, genetically, 100% related to their mother because they get recombined from a set of chromosomes derived only from her. They're not clones of one another because each one gets a slightly different recombined half of her genome, but they remain fairly related. If an egg is fertilized, it receives 16 chromosomes from the queen, still recombined, and 16 chromosomes from one of the males, for a total of 32 chromosomes for a diploid female. So, half from the 32 chromosomes of the mother queen, and half from the 16 chromosomes of the father male. This essentially makes males and females related by differing percentages, as you can see here. And as an added benefit, the queen really doesn't even need to be fertilized to produce males, but she does need to be fertilized to produce females. There's a specific gene that controls sex determination in honeybees, and it's called the complementary sex determination, or CSD gene. If an egg is fertilized and the DNA from both the mother and the father has two different CSD genes, or is heterozygous, so to speak, then it will result in a female. But if an egg ends up hemizygous, which means it's unfertilized because it only has one of the alleles, that is the CSD gene, it will become a male. So, two different, female. Just one, male. But what can happen in this sex determination system is that if an egg gets two copies of the same CSD gene, which typically happens due to inbreeding, then it will produce a diploid male, which is kind of a genetic mistake. Diploid males are inviable for the colony and are usually eaten as larvae by the worker bees. This system is beneficial because it allows for greater control over sex determination while also doing everything it can to mitigate or eliminate inbreeding. And nearly every Hymenopteran that isn't a sawfly has this system, albeit often in derived forms. Now that you understand how it works, let me explain how honeybees and other Hymenopterans use it. Haplodiploidy has been an imperative bias for the Hymenoptera to develop eusociality. It doesn't guarantee it, but it helps put them in the running, as otherwise eusociality is quite rare, but in the Hymenoptera it's actually developed independently across several different families. Not solely because of haplodiploidy, but the point is it certainly helps the process along. To understand this, let me explain how haplodiploidy actually helps the Hymenoptera. Basically, the haploid males or drones of a species have little genetic inclination to do anything other than reproduce. They don't have fathers, only mothers, so are 100% related, specifically to their mother, and somewhat less related to their brothers, and much less related to their sisters. This means they are genetically predisposed to being animals that exist to breed and nothing else, and are not remarkably sociable in any way. They exist for this because it streamlines reproduction in a very efficient way that benefits the species as a whole. In Hymenoptera, and really any species that are extremely behaviorally dependent, reproduction can actually become something of a hurdle or hindrance because of the burden of competition between males and females. By changing the dynamics of relatedness, by making the males essentially clones of their mother, they also change the dynamics of kin selection, that is, genetic incentives and imperatives. In essence, the reproductives, be they solitary parasitoid wasps or the queens of massive eusocial ant colonies, have greater control over reproduction, thus streamlining, because they can directly control the sex ratios of their offspring, which actually synergizes with the males of the species being much less behaviorally complex than the females, as the investment in the young actually correlates with the behaviors and activities of the adult. Let me explain with an example. Parasitoid wasps actually lay their eggs in instinctual sex ratios to maximize reproductive success and genetic fitness depending on host availability and quality. The males are ultimately far more disposable than the females, often living shorter lives and not even feeding after they pupate. They are less costly to produce, so if a parasitoid wasp finds a low-quality host, they will more likely lay males more than females, and if they find a high-quality host, they'll do the opposite. This gives them a tremendous advantage over other parasitoid species like flies and some beetles, which have traditional diploid sex determination. It's a specialized form of reproduction as opposed to a generalized one, which benefits the species but only in these very specific circumstances to which they're adapted to. Now, in eusocial ant, bees, and wasp colonies, sex ratios matter a lot because they are akin to resource distribution in a company. Many eusocial species only reproduce seasonally, and when they do, there's also the matter of colony turnover. In diploid termites, this can be quite a resource-intensive process, as they can often fight civil wars over who gets reproductive rights in the succession of the colony. Hymenopterans streamline this process by having males and females specifically produced for the task of reproduction. And because they can control not only the sex ratio, but also when each sex is born, they can actually limit how many males they're producing or how many females they're producing to be maximally efficient in terms of resources. This presents in honeybees in that they only produce males or drones in very specific times in the spring, often when they have an abundance of food. Despite most of the colonies surviving through the winter, you'll never see a drone honeybee in the winter for this specific reason. Haplodiploidy is not only effective, it is game theoretically rational for species with complex parental care. Every hymenopteran relies on some form of microhabitat or microhabitat maintenance for its young to survive, and is behaviorally locked because of it. And so any greater control of behavior in general assists the animal, which is true of their haplodiploid sex determination system, their articulate wasp waste, and their parental care.
Colony dynamics and nest behavior compared to other eusocial Hymenoptera, as well as the use of pollination. Alright, now that we've finally given a general explanation of how honeybees and all other eusocial Hymenoptera have come into being and the strategies they employed to do so, we need to understand that as evolution is always refining where there's competition, it makes sense that eusociality alone is not the end of the road. That means with honeybees in specific, there are further refinements to be made, and this point will elucidate itself as exactly how honeybees make their way in the world, as opposed to other eusocial Hymenoptera, such as yellow jackets, bumblebees, hornets, and all other kinds. The first thing to know is that honeybees, like most bees, are vegetarian. Many bees are equipped with a long tongue similar to a hummingbird, which they use to lap up nectar from flowers. They also collect pollen from flowers, and this collection and the spread of pollen is the main way flowering plants reproduce. By advertising their nectar, in the same way an apple tree advertises apples to be eaten, flowers attract insects in the hopes that they are able to acquire broad genetic diversity from a variety of pollen sources. This strategy has proven effective, as flowering plants are found worldwide and often co-evolve with insects. So, how is pollination conducive to eusociality, as the only things honeybees eat is pollen and nectar? Well, it works because of the sheer amount of flora, nectar, and pollen in the ecosystem. There is a copious amount of it, however, this is typically seasonal and timed to certain blooms. And also, there's extremely high competition for this nectar, in specific. Pollen is much more common than nectar, and what this means is that in order for bees to successfully be eusocial and survive off of pollen, and specifically nectar, they have to be extra well designed for it. This is where honey comes in. Honey is nectar. Most types of bees don't make honey. They collect nectar, but they don't turn it into honey. What honey basically is dehumidified nectar. The bees ingest it, add a couple enzymes to break down the sugar, and then regurgitate it as honey. But why do they do this? What is that useful for? Well, honey is useful for this one reason. It doesn't go bad. It can be stored almost indefinitely. But what is the use for that? Well, the original use was for Asian honeybees, where they came from, in the Asian dry season, which is where honeybees first evolved. The competition for nectar in the changing seasons prevented flowers from growing at all times. What this meant is that the bees required food when there wasn't any, and needed a way to store nectar for those times. This strategy just so happened to work just as well in colder climates, as long as the honeybees could survive the winter, which they do by conserving heat by snuggling together. This entire colony survival due to honey stores is what separates eusocial honeybees from other eusocial wasps and bees. They can store food and keep warm in their nests. Some ants can do this as well, but none store honey in combs the way honeybees do. And no other eusocial bees or wasps can survive the winter, or a strong dearth, which is a lack of food, the way honeybees do. So, how do honeybees survive? Well, there are three main points. Number one, the nest of the honeybee and aforementioned honey and pollen collection are necessary to survive tough times. Honeycomb is a very effective shape for storing food. In fact, it's the most economical shape possible and is used for honey, pollen, and their young. It is made from wax secreted from wax glands on their abdomen, which is produced from sugars found in the nectar and honey they consume. The young typically only eat pollen, and the adults practically never eat pollen. Number two, surviving the winter or a dearth allows honeybees to get a head start on whenever the flowers begin to arrive. What I mean is that, say a bumblebee or yellow jacket queen is just coming out of winter. They don't have a colony. In fact, they don't go into the winter with a colony either. The non-reproductives of a colony exist only when they're useful, which is the spring, or wet season. And then, only the queen will survive into the winter or dry season because there was no food to keep them alive. Because of this, the queens of most other eusocial bees and wasps, especially pollinating ones, have to start the colony all over again, renewing the cycle annually or seasonally. Because of this, they have to gradually and slowly build up their numbers, often missing out on flowers at key important times. This is the most important factor with regard to why honeybees need to exist in the way they do, with a regimented and scheduled lifespan for not just the queen, but the whole colony. Number 3, epigenetics. Epigenetics are key with regards to eusociality. Epigenetics are basically how an animal's particular genetics are expressed, and not by inherent changes to the genome itself, but rather programmed developmental alterations due to external factors. This is very important because it's how eusocial insects decide their caste system. Eusocial castes in both termites and honeybees are decided by epigenetics. In termites, depending on pheromones and context, certain young will develop into reproductive kings and queens, who will leave the colony together to start their own, because their body senses these pheromones at a juvenile stage. Their genes become expressed differently, and they develop into reproductives. This could happen to any termite at certain developmental stages, and certain species often compete to determine which ones will be the ones to reproduce, because they all technically have a shot at it. Some Hymenoptera's caste determination is similar to termites, and all are also epigenetic, but usually in a different way. In honeybees, queens are often decided by how much is fed to a specific larva when it's younger. This is done through a substance called royal jelly, which the workers excrete for the larvae. This substance is fed copiously to certain larvae, and having this early on will cause them to develop into a queen. If multiple newborn queens are born, they will call to each other by vibrating aggressively, at least in honeybee colonies, which actually produces kind of a cute sound. They then will fight to the death before leaving the hive with half the population to start a new colony. Now, this is all well and good, but honeybees utilize epigenetics in another way that's even more complicated than most other eusocial insects. This is the final key to how honeybees even happened. The honeybee lifespan and caste determination is extremely genetically scheduled. When they leave the honeycomb as newborn adults, they do the following jobs on a fairly strict schedule, which is shown here. This schedule is dictated by epigenetic shifts within the bee, often brought on by food and other pheromonal cues, and even by how much they've been working. They have some of the most complex task-oriented lives of all the insects, and they do so just so that they might survive the winter or a dearth. You may be asking, if they do all this, how do they survive the winter? In the working year, they only live about 5 to 6 weeks, although the queen can live about 2 to 4 years. Well, the answer still remains epigenetics. If the worker bees sense cold or a lack of food, they won't leave the hive, and this lack of busy work prevents the epigenetic programmed cell death that causes them to die early. Because of this, winter workers that don't really work at all can survive 4 to 6 months, far greater than the 2 months of life of the typical worker. Their lives are still extremely scheduled and regimented, all for the purpose of effective division of labor at the right times. Indeed, these insects are extremely specialized pollinators for being eusocial, and have utilized epigenetics, food preservation, haplodiploidy, trial by combat, selfless career versatility, programmed and scheduled cell death, unarticulated wasp waste, and kamikaze tactics in order to outcompete other eusocial bees and wasps. Also, keep in mind, we only know all this because honeybees are an important agricultural animal, and thus are a target for research. Imagine the hidden complexities and secrets of all the biodiversity that remains undiscovered in the world. There's simply so much we do not know. Thanks for watching this dense and complicated episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more digestible and easy to learn bug content. Thanks.